What if the history of World War II that you know is wrong? Today, we are diving into a really explosive book by an economic historian named Guido Giacomo Preparata. It's called Conjuring Hitler, and it makes a stunning claim that the war wasn't some tragic accident of history, but a meticulously engineered event. So let's walk through his controversial argument.
We all know the standard story, right? A nation humiliated, an economy in ruins, and a population that gets seduced by a charismatic monster. But Preparata's work just throws a wrench in all of that, asking a really uncomfortable question. What if the rise of the Third Reich wasn't an accident at all?
The book's central idea is, frankly, shocking. It argues that the rise of Hitler and the entire Nazi war machine was deliberately engineered. The theory goes that powerful groups in Britain and America didn't just fail to stop him, they actively built him up as a kind of geopolitical weapon, a pawn for a war they had been planning for decades. To even begin to understand this, you have to look at the motive. Okay, so to get the why behind this whole theory, we need to rewind the clock to the turn of the 20th century. Preparata argues this entire decades-long plot was born from a single, terrifying fear that absolutely haunted the British Empire, the fear of losing control of the entire world. And this fear even had a name, the Heartland Theory. The idea is actually pretty simple. You see, Eurasia, that massive landmass of Europe and Asia, is like an unconquerable fortress, just packed with resources and people. The theory was any power or alliance of powers that could dominate this heartland, well, they'd be unstoppable, and all the navies of Britain and America would be totally obsolete. So this led to the ultimate nightmare for the British elite, a Eurasian Embrace. Just think about it for a second. Germany's incredible industrial power, combined with Russia's endless natural resources. The book argues that this fusion would create a superpower that nobody could ever beat. So the only solution was to make sure that alliance never happened, to use the naval sea powers to encircle and basically shatter Eurasia. And Preparata puts it really bluntly in his book. This wasn't just some casual foreign policy goal. He says it was the main objective. He argues that pretty much every major strategic move Britain made during this time was driven by this one single obsession, preventing a German-Russian alliance at all costs. So, okay, if preventing a German-Russian team-up was the why, the next obvious question is how. How could they possibly control events like that? The book says the main tool wasn't spies or diplomacy. It was money. A staggering amount of Anglo-American money, deliberately pumped right into the heart of Germany. And this is where you hit a huge paradox. Germany was absolutely crushed after World War I. They were buried in war reparations, and their economy was wiped out by hyperinflation. So you have to ask, where did all the money come from to build the most terrifying military on the planet in just a few years? Preparata's answer is simple. The winners paid for it. The way they did it financially was kind of brilliant. The Dawes Plan of 1924, which the book calls a J.P. Morgan production, created this perfect circle of money. American banks lend huge sums to Germany. Germany uses that money to rebuild and pay reparations to the Allies, and then the Allies use that reparation money to pay back their own war loans to America. The money just goes around and around, and the end result? Germany's entire industry gets a state-of-the-art upgrade, all financed by Wall Street. And we're not talking about pocket change. This chart, based on figures from the book, shows hundreds of millions of dollars of American investment in Germany. And look at the date. This is happening as late as 1941. You've got huge corporations like Standard Oil and General Motors with massive operations there, essentially building the industrial backbone for what would become the Nazi war machine. The book claims these connections went deep. The money wasn't just going to random companies, it was targeted at the very corporations that would become the arsenal of the Third Reich. We're talking IG Farben, the chemical giant that made Zyklon B, the huge steel cartels that acted as Nazi slush funds, and even Union Banking Corp., which was managed by Prescott Bush, and according to the book, helped finance the very industrialists who put Hitler in power. All right, so the money is flowing and the factories are being built. The book argues that the final piece of the puzzle was a really complex diplomatic trap. And this is where the whole story we know about appeasement gets flipped completely upside down. According to Preparata, appeasement wasn't weakness. It wasn't a mistake. He says it was a masquerade, a carefully choreographed performance designed to make Hitler think he had a green light to expand eastward, all the while knowing they were leading him into a trap, a two-front war he could never win. So how did they pull it off?
Preparata argues the British establishment wasn't divided at all. He says it was one solid group wearing different masks to confuse Germany. You had the appeasers, who signaled friendship. You had the anti-Bolsheviks, who played on the mutual fear of the Soviet Union. You had the calm, pragmatic core. And then you had the loud anti-Nazis like Churchill, who created the perfect illusion of disagreement. It was, the book says, a brilliant psychological game to lure Hitler into the trap.
This quote from a French diplomat at the time, which is cited in the book, just perfectly captures the essence of this alleged strategy. It wasn't a clumsy accident. It was a carefully spun web. And Germany, feeling confident and totally misunderstood, flew right into it. And that brings us to the final act. According to the book, all these threads, the geopolitical fear, the financial rebuilding, the diplomatic acting, it all came together in the late 1930s to produce the exact war that the British planners had supposedly wanted all along. So if you look at the timeline through this lens, everything changes. The Rhineland reoccupation in 36, that was a test, and the Allies intentionally did nothing. The Munich Agreement in 38, not a desperate plea for peace, but a strategic move to hand Czechoslovakia to Hitler, clearing his path toward Russia. The guarantee to Poland in 39, that was the final tripwire. It guaranteed that when Hitler finally invaded, Britain would have its war. And maybe the most damning claim of all, D-Day. The Western Front isn't opened until 1944, only after the Soviet Union had already broken the back of the German army on the Eastern Front.
So what's the bottom line? The book's conclusion is absolutely staggering. That World War II was the planned-out final act of a decades-long British strategy. It was the brutal final solution to the Heartland problem, a war designed to make Germany and Russia destroy each other, leaving the Anglo-American sea powers as the undisputed masters of the world.
Now look, it goes without saying that this theory completely turns history on its head, and many historians would argue fiercely against it. But whether you think it's credible or just a wild conspiracy theory, reading it forces you to ask a really important question. How much of the official story of history do we just accept without ever questioning it?